If you're a priest, it's not very often that you end up on the front page of the newspaper. In fact, if you're a priest, you probably don't want to end up on the front page of the newspaper. If somebody comes along and says, hey, you're going to make the front page of the newspaper later this week, you assume it's not a good thing. It's weird that I was on the front page. In fact, I didn't even realize. I thought I made the sports section, which was laughable enough that I would make the sports section, but then it was shown to me unmistakably that there I was, right on the front page, and for doing nothing more than being a fan of the Kansas City Chiefs and having Doug Dowdy attend the gathering service at this church. He was shocked that I was a fan of the Kansas City Chiefs because he said, well, I thought you came from Florida. Well, I did. I thought you grew up in Memphis. Well, I did. So what's this Kansas City business? Well, the thing is, if you're a priest, you oftentimes get the wonderful experience of experiencing life and having those places that you get to live really shape you and become hometowns of sorts. And this certainly was the case in my adulthood with the city of Kansas City. I moved to Kansas City when I was 21 years old. It was 2 weeks after I graduated college. It was 4 months before Shelley and I were married. I didn't know anything about Kansas City whatsoever. But over the 14 years after that, which is pretty transformative years, 21 to 35, I left having had 2 children there, a marriage, obviously. I also left, went in with the Church of the Nazarene and left an Episcopal priest. In fact, not only just an Episcopal priest, but an Episcopal priest that had started a baby church in Kansas City, Missouri for the diocese. The other thing that I left was a rabid fan of the Kansas City Royals and Kansas City Chiefs. Now, many of you probably have not been to Kansas City. It's not a great, top, destination place for people's vacations. I mean, nobody's like, oh, we're going to go to this luxurious vacation in Kansas City. Just can't wait to get there. It doesn't have mountains. It doesn't have beaches. It does have great barbecue, by the way. The weather's, really quite terrible in the winter and the summer. But what it has are wonderful people and these sports teams. And they're everywhere there. And it's impossible not to be drawn into that. And as much as anything, and I've tried to analyze this because sports really, let's be honest, don't make any sense. But the reason is because I loved the people of Kansas City. And these things became Muzak, just kind of in that world. I mean, for instance, the Royals, they play 162 games. And so that's almost half the year that there's a baseball game on there. And people being drawn into it. And most of the time I was there, it was just terrible. It was excruciating to root for these teams. The Chiefs would be good, but then they had the no punt game where the other team never even had to punt the ball. They blew a 28 lead that they had after halftime. They lost one since I was here when the opposing quarterback threw a touchdown to himself. Now, I know that you all, this is true, by the way. Some of you probably hate football. I hear from you sometimes. And with, reasons that are totally logical. It's a brutal game. Have you seen what's going on with head injuries? What they pay teachers and these professional athletes. I noticed, though, and I always think this, by the way, if you want to tell me this on the way out, I always know and wonder what sort of moral inventory they're doing with the things that they care about. It's like, I hate the vacuousness of professional sports. I can't wait to get home and watch The Bachelor. In other words, it's not great if we're going to analyze each other's passions there in popular society. But again, I love the fact that this team hadn't been there in 50 years and what that meant for the people I love there. And as much as anything, that's why it matters to me. Because I love those people. I love that they tell these stories about going to games with their grandparents who aren't there, or even their parents who aren't there. They love taking their kids, even when they watch them lose. And thus, I am excited for the people that I care about as much as anything. These people who waited for something really to cheer about. We're not good at waiting, you know? We're terrible, in fact, at waiting. I don't know if you noticed, but the gospel lesson today is utterly about these two elderly people who waited their entire lives in going to worship, their entire lives, for God to break into their world. And I wonder, would we? Would we wait? Do we wait? Do we seek to have eyes to see and ears to hear how God is coming into our world? I fear that we don't. I fear that we won't. And I fear that in profound ways for the world about us. We don't have to wait on much, and we're unwilling to wait on almost anything. And even though football really doesn't matter, some things really do. And so for Simeon, this elderly man who was promised by God that before you die, you're going to see me move in a unique way into the world. And he lived most of his life, and he's at death's doorstep. And finally, this impoverished family shows up at the temple one day, and he says, I now can go in peace. Everything I've waited for my entire life, I finally got to see. I wonder what it felt like, in his 30s when it didn't come, in his 40s when it didn't come, in his 50s when it didn't come, in his 60s when it didn't come, in his 70s when it didn't. What kept him going? The same with this prophetess Anna, who it says lives at the temple. There she is day and night in the environs of God, wanting God to come and not seeing God's presence in the ways that she so desperately wants to see. Until finally the end of her life. Would we wait? And it's a true open question because, again, we live in a society where we don't wait for anything, but we have changed. This is being very well documented in how we even religiously perceive the world about us and our willingness to wait for anything with our faith that doesn't come like Burger King. I'm reading this book on faith formation and how to do faith formation in our cultural moment. But it's so much more than about how you form Christians. Because what it's asking are some pivotal questions like, why 1,000 years ago, if you met anyone, they would never not believe in transcendence. In other words, that there were gods. They probably even believed in angels and demons and all these sorts of things. This was just a common thing. It would be utterly weird to meet someone who was not utterly convinced that there was transcendence in this world, things above and beyond them. And their lives were consumed with that. And why is it now that it is so difficult, even for those of us who show up to places like this week to week, to believe that there's anything above us at all? That it nags at us, is this even real? Is it worth showing up for? What has taken place? And we like to believe, well, we're more sophisticated than they are. We're more in touch with reality. We are freaking out, and maybe we should, about the coronavirus. They had the Black Plague. They knew something about reality, in other words. Why is it, this author asks, that I'm reading about faith formation, that in our world, an ancient cathedral, majestic, wood, pillars, stands the test of times, this amazing, huge structure that can be around for millennia? Why is it that is called inauthentic in our world, whereas like a worship theater with facades and screens and everything else is all of a sudden real and relatable? And it's because he would argue, and you got to follow me here, that Freud won. When Freud said, that we have that thing in us called the id, if you remember this, and you can mind this thing that says, that drives you for sensuality and your appetites and everything else, that basically, Freud said that's more of our authentic self. And things like the 60s, so you don't really need, religion and all of that. Your authentic self are your appetites. Your desires, what feeds you. And what's lo and behold happened within the religious environments are that we don't really come to church to connect with transcendence. We come to church for God to show up before us, to feed our id. And so we say things like, how does this church feed me? I don't get anything out of that. What is it going to do for me? Now, we actually want to do things for you here, and yet it's so different than how things are. So, I didn't get anything out of today, and lo and behold, if you hang around the church well enough and long enough, there's going to be Sundays like that. I hope it isn't today. But that is so different from that worldview. It is me, mine, and thus we don't ever go deep. And that's the irony, that when you lose transcendence and you worship self, the thing that you lose is self. We live in a world where you can have everything. Everything almost immediately, all that your id wants can get at almost any moment, and we are depressed, and we are addicted, and we are lost, and we have no purpose, and we don't have any meaning, and the reason is because we've lost the sense that there's something bigger than me in the world, something worth living for that doesn't just feed me, because it's odd. We just happen to believe, if you show up in a place like this and you listen long enough, made in the image of a God who is a community of persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and thus we need each other, and it's not just about us, and we can't really ever know who we are without each other. Or as Martin Luther King Jr. Said, I can never be, because we're made in the image of a triune God who's a community, I can never be who I'm supposed to be without you being who you're supposed to be, because we need each other. But in a world that's forgotten that worships only self, then we don't ever wait to see that. The question isn't when you walk into a church, what does the world need from me? What does the creator of the world have for me to do for the benefit and life of the world? And these are the more interesting questions. And by the way, they're the questions that help you find your life. It's why Jesus says, if you want to find your life, go lose it. Go lose it for something bigger than you, something that matters more than you. Because oddly enough, and I promise you it's the case, that the more and more you just stare at yourself and become emotionally and spiritually like a question mark, just looking at your own belly button, you will see nothing more. And you will be nothing more. And you will be depressed and maybe addicted and lose meaning and purpose. But when you raise your eyes and you wait for things that are worth waiting for and show up even when it's hard, maybe especially so, you find a life that has meaning. Do you know, other than becoming an Episcopalian, Shelley and I have never made one step in our lives that we, in the immediate context, knew, even had any particular confidence in being the right move. It just wasn't. When I moved to Kansas City 21 years old. Most of you know this. I gave up my dream of flying in the military. I just gotten accepted to pilot training. Gave it up. Went to Kansas City. Didn't go great in the Church of the Nazarene. It's how you become an Episcopal priest. I mean, they liked me fine. I just knew it wasn't the right thing. What do you do with that in that immediate context of history? You wait. You believe that God actually placed you there for a reason. And 30 years later, here you are with a sense of purpose and seeing how God was present and worked it out. When we left Kansas City to go to Pensacola, Florida in 2007, I'll never forget, I woke up the first morning in Pensacola, Florida, in the Hampton Inn by the airport, and I didn't sleep all night because it felt like I was cheating, like on your wife or something, by being there and talking to these people anyway. And the first thing I told Shelley, I said, I guess I'm going to watch a bunch more Royals games because I'm not moving here. I moved there. And for months, maybe even a year, I wasn't sure if we made the right move. It was great having the beach. Winters were kind of like today. But I wasn't sure it was right. Carolyn Dobler, the senior warden who got on the phone and made the invitation for me to come here, could tell you very certainly that I had those same sorts of thoughts when moving here. You know what makes the difference? Showing up and giving your life to something bigger than you. And I'm not big on that any more than anyone else. Part of it literally is my job. But it's when work weeks were scheduled a certain way and they got blown up because of a family emergency or a death. And all of a sudden, the people in this congregation weren't just new folks to me and people that I just didn't know exactly who they were. They were people who needed me in their lives. And my life was formed by service to something bigger than me, to something that was beyond me. And that, my friends, is worth showing up for and waiting for. In fact, it's the only thing that will make you whole. And God is calling you in some way to be about something bigger than yourself, to show up to things that aren't just all about you, to wait for things that are worthy of your wait, and to be found, and to know in ways that you never could if you only look at your own belly button. Nothing that is worth doing, nothing that is worth doing can be achieved in our lifetimes. Therefore, we must be saved by hope. Nothing which is true or beautiful or good makes any complete sense in any immediate context of history. Therefore, we must be saved by faith. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we must be saved by love. Reinhold Niebuhr. These three endure: faith, hope, love. The greatest of them is love. And because I love the people that God put in my life as a 21-year-old, I end where I start and say, go Chiefs. Amen.